Welcome back, Dunlaps. We are going to read some more Tale of Despereaux. Apparently, Ellie is going to join us today. Chapter 40, Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Despereaux slipped through the hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council, 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse, sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" one said. "Excuse me," said another. "I didn't hear right," said a third. "I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost! A ghost!" And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked, and there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester, "son, you have come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had been gone only a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling. "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No," called the most very honored head mouse. "No." "I've destroyed it," said Lester. "I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me?" He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. "No," shouted the head mouse again. "No. Do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the head mouse. "Son," he said, "please." Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. "Forgive me," said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love, a powerful, wonderful thing, and a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could ever ask or ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, "I forgive you, Pa." And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. "You were wrong," he said, "all of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I asked you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent." "Never," said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized that he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. "Mice of the council," he said, "we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye." And from the members of the mouse council there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. Chapter 41. The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the P's room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping, although weeping really is too small a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, when they are revealed to be human, to have hearts, their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified, absolutely. But he spoke up anyway. Sir, the mouse said to the king. But the king did not hear him. And as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took his great golden crown from his lap and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws. And, much in the way of Miguel, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he had loved the queen with the whole of his heart, so too he loved his daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she had been taken from him. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. "Excuse me," he said. He wasn't certain really how a mouse could address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a long moment. He cleared his throat. He spoke as loudly as he was capable of speaking. "Excuse me, most very honored head person." King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest. He looked around the room. "Down here, most very honored head person," said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor. He squinted. "Is that a bug speaking to me?" he asked. "No," said Despereaux. "I am a mouse. We met before." "A mouse?" bellowed the king. "A mouse is but one step removed from a rat." "Sir," said Despereaux, "most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is." "You do?" said the king. He sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. "Where?" he said, and as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux, 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower and revealing his own brown fur. "Sir, most very honored head person, sir," said Despereaux as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. "She's in the dungeon." "Liar," said the king. He sat back up. "I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon." "But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hidden, and only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found." "Ugh," said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. "Do not speak to me of rats and what they know," he shouted. "Rats are illegal. Rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist." "Sir, most very honored head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them has taken your daughter, and if you will send—" The king started humming. "I can't hear you," he stopped to shout. "I cannot hear you. And anyway, what you say is wrong because you are a rodent and therefore a liar." He started to hum again, and then he stopped and said, "I have hired fortune tellers and a magician. They are coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth." "I am telling you the truth," said Despereaux. "I promise." But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up to his neck and pulled at the red thread, and suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light, and the knight swinging his sword, and the terrible moment when he had realized that the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him? You know me. That was what the knight in his dream had said. Yes, said Despereaux out loud in wonder. I do know you. I can't hear you, sang the king. I'll have to do it myself, said the mouse. I will be the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me. Despereaux turned. He left the weeping king. He went to find the threadmaster. Chapter 42. The Rest of the Thread. The threadmaster was sitting atop his spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth and eating a piece of celery. Well, look here, he said when he saw Despereaux. Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved a human princess, back from the dungeon in one piece. The old threadmaster would say that I didn't do my job well, that because that you were still alive, I must have tied the thread incorrectly. But it is not so. And how do I know it is not so? Because the thread is still around your neck. He nodded and took a bite of his celery. I need the rest of it, said Despereaux. The rest of what? Your neck? The rest of the thread. Well, I can't just hand it over to any old mouse, said the threadmaster. They say red thread is special, sacred, though I myself, after having spent so much time with it, know it for what it is. What is it? Said Despereaux. Thread, said the threadmaster. He shrugged and took another loud bite of celery. Nothing more, nothing less. But I pretend, friend, I pretend. And what, may I ask, do you intend to do with the thread? Save the princess. Ah, yes, the princess. The beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it? I have to save her. There is no one but me to do it. It seems to be that way with most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except oneself. And how exactly will you use the spool of thread to save a princess? A rat has taken her and hidden her in the dungeon, so I have to go back to the dungeon, and it is full of twists and turns and hidden chambers. Like a maze, said the threadmaster. Yes, like a maze, and I have to find my way to her, wherever she is hidden, and then I have to lead her back out again, and the only way to do that is with the thread. Gregory the jailer tied a rope around his ankle so that he would not get lost. As the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking of Gregory and his broken rope, dying, lost in the darkness. Said Despereaux, I will use the thread. The threadmaster nodded. I see, he said. He took a meditative bite of celery. You, friend, are on a quest. I don't know what that is, said Despereaux. You don't have to know. You just have to feel compelled to do the thing, the impossible, important task at hand. Impossible? Said Despereaux. Impossible, said the threadmaster. Important. He sat chewing his celery and staring somewhere past Despereaux, and then suddenly he leapt off his spool. Who am I to stand in the way of a quest? He said. Roll her away. I can have it? Yes, for your quest. Despereaux put his front paws up and touched the spool. He gave it an experimental push forward. Thank you, he said, looking into the eye of the threadmaster. I don't know your name. Hobbes? Thank you, Hobbes. There is something else, something that belongs with the thread. Hobbes went into the corner and came back with a needle. You can use it for protection. Like a sword, said Despereaux. Like a knight would have. Yes, said Hobbes. He gnawed off a length of thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist. Like so. Thank you, Hobbes, said Despereaux. He put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. Wait, said Hobbes. He stood up on his hind legs, put his paws on Despereaux's shoulders, and leaned in close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp, clean scent of celery as the threadmaster bent his head, took hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck in his sharp teeth, and pulled on it hard. "There," said Hobbs, when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. "Now you're free. You see, you're not going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you choose to." "Yes," said Despereaux, "because I am on a quest." The word felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, reader. Say the word quest out loud. It is an extraordinary word, isn't it? So small and yet so full of wonder, so full of hope. "Goodbye," said Hobbs, as Despereaux pushed the spool of thread out of the threadmaster's hole. I have never known a mouse who has made it out of the dungeon only to go back into it again. "Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse among mice." That's it for today. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.